Do you even realize what you've done? My voice was steady, controlled. That's what scared her the most. Not yelling, not cursing, just cold, measured words that cut deeper than any screaming match ever could. My name's Travis Lawson. I'm 48 years old, and I've spent my life playing the odds. Some men live by rules. I live by instincts. Grew up in the back rooms of Las Vegas casinos, watching my old man hustle rich tourists out of their cash with a deck of cards and a straight face. He taught me young, read the man, not the hand. People give themselves away in the little things, a twitch of the mouth, a second too long holding their breath, the way their fingers tighten around the edge of the table. Everything in life is a gamble, but the ones who play blind always lose. Now I run my own game, private, high stakes, invitation only. The kind of place where fortunes change hands in a single night and the air is thick with expensive cigars and bad decisions. My office is a dimly lit back room in a bar called the Silver Ace, a joint tucked between a pawn shop and a laundromat on the south side of Chicago. It's not much to look at, but it's mine. Every night, men with too much money and too little sense come through my doors, chasing that rush, convinced they can outplay the odds. I let them believe it for a while. I built this life with my own two hands, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I could have gone the straight and narrow, but let's be honest, nothing legal pays like the game. And I always had a reason to play. My daughter, Heidi, 15 going on 30, sharp as a tack, too smart for her own good. Then there's Sophie, my niece, 10 years old, lost her parents too young. I took her in without a second thought. Family first. Always. Vanessa and I met young. She was 21, all fire and energy, a girl who couldn't sit still for 5 minutes without tapping her fingers or bouncing a knee. She wanted excitement, and I gave it to her, at first. But routine has a way of creeping in, even when you live life on the edge. Marriage, mortgage, kids, the grind of day-to-day life. I didn't see it then, but she was getting restless. Looking for something else. Someone else. The first time I suspected something was off, it was small. A late night out that didn't match the story she told. A laugh a little too forced when I asked simple questions. A new perfume she never wore around me. I didn't react, didn't accuse. I just watched. The way a good player watches the table, waiting for the perfect moment to call a bluff. I didn't say anything at first. There's a rule in poker. Let a man dig his own grave before you take his chips. You don't call the bluff too early. You don't tip your hand. You wait, watch, let them think they're in control. Then, when they least expect it, you take the whole damn pot. Vanessa started moving different. Used to be, she'd come home tired, kick her shoes off at the door, pour herself a glass of wine, and sit on the couch with some crime show playing in the background. Now, she was coming home late, showering right away, checking her phone like she was waiting for something. She laughed too much at nothing. And the perfume, something new, something sharp, something she never wore for me. It didn't take a genius to put the pieces together. But I didn't like playing off assumptions. A bad read could cost you everything. So, I called in a favor. Mike Dawson had been a cop for 20 years before he took his pension and set up shop as a private investigator. He still had friends on the force, still had eyes everywhere. I met him years ago when he was running down some punk who tried to skim money off my game. We had an understanding. He didn't mess with my business, and if I ever needed information, he was the guy to call. I need eyes on Vanessa, I said, handing him an envelope of cash. Mike didn't ask questions. He didn't need to. A week later, he slid a folder across my desk. You sure you want to open that? I flipped it open. Hotel receipts. Photos. Her and some guy. Ryan Blake. The name meant nothing to me, but the face was familiar. A nobody with a slick smile and a cheap leather jacket. I'd seen him around town. The kind of guy who talked big, but never had a stack of chips to back it up. A drifter. A thrill seeker. The kind of man who never stays in one place too long because eventually, people catch on. Mike lit a cigarette and leaned back. You want me to handle this? I closed the folder. No. I wasn't about to have some low-life gumshoe shake him down or scare him off. That wasn't my style. There was no point in yelling, no point in making a scene. I wanted Vanessa to see, to feel, to understand exactly what she threw away. So, I waited. The next night, I followed her. Stayed back, kept my headlights off when she turned into the parking lot of a motel on the edge of town. I watched from across the street as she got out, checked her phone, and walked inside like she'd done it 100 times before. I didn't go in. Didn't need to. I'd seen enough. I went home, packed up her things. Not messy, not thrown around like some broken-hearted sap on a bad soap opera. Neat. Precise. Every piece of clothing, every shoe, every piece of jewelry I ever bought her. By the time she came home, the front porch looked like a department store clearance rack. She stopped dead when she saw it. Keys in her hand, breath caught in her throat. I was sitting on the porch steps, drinking a whiskey, calm as a man who just won the easiest hand of his life. Her voice was small. Travis. I tipped my glass toward the suitcase. You forgot some things. She swallowed hard. Save it. I stood up, towering over her, letting the silence do the talking. I know. I've known. She looked at the bags, then back at me. It's not what you think. I almost laughed at that. Vanessa, you walked into a motel room with another man. What, were you selling vacuum cleaners? Tears welled up in her eyes. Crocodile tears. Too little, too late. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. I want you out. Now. You'll get the papers in the morning. Don't call, don't come back. You made your bet. I tilted my head. Now live with it. She stared at me for a long moment, like she was searching for some crack in the armor, some weak spot to exploit. But there was nothing left to say. She left without another word. I stood there, watching her drive away, the taillights disappearing into the night. I didn't feel anger. Didn't feel sadness. Just a quiet certainty. She was gone, and I wasn't about to lose a single night's sleep over it. I went inside, poured myself another whiskey, and let the quiet settle around me. The house felt different already, lighter somehow. No more forced smiles, no more sidelong glances, no more waiting for the other shoe to drop. Just me, my thoughts, and the steady tick of the old clock on the wall. Heidi would be home from her friend's place in the morning. I'd tell her then. She wasn't a little kid. She'd seen enough to know when something wasn't right. I wouldn't sugarcoat it, wouldn't paint Vanessa as some villain, but I wouldn't lie either. The truth had a way of cutting through the noise. But first, I had some business to take care of. I picked up my phone, dialed a number I hadn't called in years. Lawson, a familiar voice answered, gruff and all business. Richie, I need a favor. Richie Caruso owned half the rental properties on the west side and had a long memory when it came to people who crossed the wrong lines. He wasn't a gangster, not officially, but you didn't do business in this town without knowing a guy like Richie. Name it, he said. There's a guy, Ryan Blake. Likes to sniff around where he doesn't belong. You know him. There was a pause. Then a chuckle. Yeah, I know him. Runs his mouth more than his bankroll. What's he to you? He's nobody. But he's with my ex now. Another pause. Longer this time. Ah, I see. I want him out, I said, swirling the ice in my glass. No work, no place to stay. Make it so he's got no reason to hang around. Richie exhaled through his nose. You want this quiet? Don't care how you do it. Just make sure he knows his welcome's run out. You got it. I hung up, set the phone down, and leaned back in my chair. That was step one. Step two was making sure Vanessa didn't get a damn thing from me except what she walked in with. Divorce wasn't a game I wanted to play, but if I had to, I'd play to win. I had a guy for that, too, Ben Foster, best divorce lawyer in the city if you wanted to come out clean. I called him next. I was wondering when I'd hear from you, Ben said, amused. Got word from Dawson. You ready to do this? She cheated. I want it fast, clean, and airtight. No alimony, no leverage, nothing. I don't care what it costs. She gonna fight it? She's got no ground to stand on. Ben chuckled. I like when it's easy. I'll get the paperwork started. I hung up and downed the last of my whiskey. That was step two. Step three? Making sure Heidi and Sophie didn't suffer for any of this. Vanessa could rot in whatever hole she found herself in, but my girls weren't going to feel the fallout. I got up, grabbed my keys, and headed out. There was one more conversation I needed to have before the night was over. I drove across town, the city streets quieter than usual, the kind of hush that only comes when people are either too tired or too smart to be out. Pulled up in front of a little house with a sagging front porch and a light still on in the kitchen. The door opened before I even knocked. Figured you'd show up, Hank said, wiping his hands on a rag. Hank Peterson had been fixing things his whole life, houses, cars, people when they needed it. Built like a brick wall, always smelled like sawdust and oil. He was the guy you called when something was broken and you needed it put right. We'd known each other since we were kids, both raised on the rougher side of town, both learned early how to survive. I stepped inside, the place smelling like fresh wood and coffee. You got time for a drink? Got time for whatever this is, he said, leading me to the kitchen. He pulled out a couple of beers, popped the tops, slid one across the table. I took a swig. Vanessa's out. Hank didn't react, Just took a sip of his own. Figured that was coming. Found out she was running around with some guy. Caught her slipping into a motel like it was just another Tuesday night. He exhaled through his nose, shook his head. Damn shame. You want me to take care of anything? Already handled. Richie's making sure her boy toy won't have much reason to stick around, and Ben's working the divorce so she doesn't get a dime. Hank nodded. And the kid? Heidi? She's smart. She'll get it. Sophie's young, but she's got a tough streak. I drummed my fingers on the table. Still, they don't deserve to feel any of this. Hank leaned back in his chair, studying me. You gonna be all right? I huffed a laugh. Better than she will be. That got a small grin out of him. Good. No use crying over someone who folded a winning hand. We drank in silence for a bit, the kind of quiet that sits easy between men who don't need to fill space with words. Eventually, I stood, stretched my shoulders. Got one more thing I need you for. Name it. The house. Needs fixing up. Feels off now. He understood what I meant. Some people called it bad energy, ghosts, whatever. To me, it was just a house full of things I didn't need anymore. Vanessa's touch was all over that place, and I wanted it gone. I'll start tomorrow, Hank said. Might take a few weeks, but I'll make it right. I clapped a hand on his shoulder. Appreciate it. Just make sure you don't do anything stupid in the meantime, he said, smirking. No promises. I left feeling lighter than I had in years. Steps 1, 2, and 3 were in motion. Now all that was left was waiting for the cards to fall exactly where I wanted them. The next few weeks moved fast. The papers went through, clean and tight, just like Ben promised. Vanessa didn't even fight it. Maybe she knew she wouldn't win, or maybe she finally realized she'd burned her last bridge. Either way, she was gone, and that was all that mattered. Richie did his part too. Ryan Blake vanished like a bad hand folded too soon. Word was he tried to get a job managing some dive bar across town, but nobody wanted to hire a guy with my name in his history. Last I heard, he packed up and left the city. Smartest thing he ever did. Hank showed up the day after our talk, toolbox in hand. He worked fast, ripping out the last of Vanessa's taste, painting over the memories. Fresh wood, new colors, nothing that reminded me of the past. When Heidi got home, she didn't ask a lot of questions. She just looked around at the half-finished walls, the furniture covered in plastic, and nodded. Looks better already, she said, dropping her backpack by the door. I knew she understood. She always did. Sophie, on the other hand, needed more. She was still a kid. Kids don't see shades of gray, just good and bad, right and wrong. Is Aunt Vanessa coming back? She asked one night, sitting cross-legged on the floor while I dealt a deck of cards between us. No, I said, flipping a queen over. She made her choice. She studied the card, pressing her lips together. Did she love us? I set my hand down, met her eyes. She loved herself more. Sophie nodded, like that made sense. She picked up her cards, held them close to her chest like she was guarding a secret. Good. She wasn't nice to you anyway. That was that. Life started settling into a new rhythm. I put more time into the game, tightening my guest list, making sure only the right kind of players sat at my table. Money rolled in like always, but it wasn't just about the cash. It was about control, keeping the house standing while everyone else took the risks. Then one night, Rebecca Hayes walked in. She wasn't like the women who usually hovered around my world. No fake smiles, no high-pitched laughs meant to make a man feel bigger than he was. She was sharp, carried herself like she knew exactly where she stood in every room she entered. Tall, auburn hair, dressed like she didn't need to impress anybody. She wasn't a gambler, wasn't someone looking for a thrill, she was here for business. Travis Lawson, she said, sliding into the empty seat across from me after the game wrapped up for the night. I sipped my drink, studying her. That's my name. I hear you run the cleanest high-stakes game in Chicago. I smirked. That depends on who you ask. I'm asking. She was looking for a place to park some money, wanted in on a new kind of investment. Not just cards, but the entire setup, VIP clients, private events, high-end security. The kind of thing that turned a backroom poker game into something bigger, more legitimate. I listened, let her lay her cards on the table. She knew the business, knew where the real money was. And she wasn't asking for a handout, she wanted in, wanted to work for it. It was an interesting offer, one I didn't dismiss right away. By the end of the night, we had a deal. Hank was right. No use crying over someone who folded a winning hand. There was always another game to play, always another move to make. And this time, I was playing for keeps. Rebecca didn't waste time. Within a week, she had numbers, Projections, a list of potential investors, real ones, not the kind who just wanted to throw money on the table and hope for the best. She knew the business side of things better than I did, knew how to make the game bigger without losing what made it work in the first place. We met at the Silver Ace after hours, the place quiet except for the hum of the neon sign out front. She spread out a folder on the table, tapping her nails against a line of numbers. "You're leaving money on the table," she said, looking up at me. "This setup is solid, but you're capping your own growth. You could be running private tournaments, bigger buy-ins, exclusive memberships." I leaned back, took a slow sip of my drink. "And how do you know so much about this world?" "I used to run a high-stakes lounge in Vegas," she said, matter of fact. "Before I got tired of men who thought they were smarter than me." I liked that answer. She wasn't looking for a shortcut, wasn't asking me to trust her blindly. She was showing me what she could do, proving her worth before I even asked. I respected that. "All right," I said, setting my glass down. "Let's do it." Over the next few months, things changed. The game moved from a backroom operation to something bigger, something polished. We kept the exclusivity, but the stakes got higher. A new location, a better clientele, security that made sure no one walked in who wasn't supposed to be there. It wasn't just a poker game anymore. It was a business. And it was mine. Vanessa tried reaching out once, a half-assed text message that didn't even deserve a reply. Probably thought I'd softened up, maybe regretted walking away from the life she thought was boring. Too bad. That door was nailed shut. Heidi was doing well, focusing on school, keeping her head up like I knew she would. Sophie was growing into her own, sharp like Heidi, but with a little more fire. She still played cards with me, still guarded her hand like the game meant something more than it did. Maybe one day she'd take over the table herself. One night, I stood outside the new club, watching the last of the players file in. The lights were low, the air thick with the quiet hum of a game about to start. Everything was in place. The house was full, and I was holding all the cards. Rebecca stepped up beside me, hands in her pockets. "Not bad for a guy who used to run a game out of a bar," she said. I smirked. Not bad at all. Life didn't hand out second chances, you had to make them yourself. And I had. No looking back, no regrets. The only thing that mattered was what came next. Because in the end, the house always wins. And I'd made damn sure I was the house. A year later, I stood at the edge of the poker floor, watching the game unfold. The new club was everything Rebecca had promised, exclusive, high stakes, invitation only. The kind of place where men came to test their luck, and I made sure the house always came out on top. The floors were polished, the lighting low, the air thick with cigar smoke, and the quiet hum of money moving across the table. Every detail had been sharpened, every risk calculated. It wasn't some backroom hustle anymore. This was a business. Hank sat at the bar, nursing a whiskey, watching me the way he always did, like a man who'd seen too much to be surprised anymore. "You done yet?" he asked, smirking. I snorted. "Done with what?" "With all this. Proving whatever the hell you needed to prove." I leaned against the bar, scanning the room, watching the players, watching the way they leaned in, the way their fingers twitched on their chips, the way the air shifted just before a big bluff. Some habits don't die. "Nah," I said, taking a slow sip of my drink. "Not done." Hank just shook his head, chuckling. "Didn't think so." Vanessa? She was long gone. Word was she bounced around a few apartments, couldn't hold onto anything steady. Ryan Blake disappeared off the map. Maybe he was running the same tired game in another city. Maybe he was scraping by doing some bottom-rung hustle. Didn't matter. They were both just names I didn't need to remember. Heidi was heading to college soon, sharp as ever. She never needed me to tell her what kind of woman not to become, she saw it for herself. Sophie was getting better at poker, still trying to read me, still convinced she could outplay me someday. Maybe she would. Rebecca was still around. Business first, always, but there was something easy about having her in my corner. She didn't need saving, didn't need anything from me she couldn't get herself. I liked that. I set my drink down, straightened my tie, and stepped toward the table where a fresh game was about to start. The players looked up, waiting for me to deal. I let the silence stretch just long enough, let them feel the weight of the moment. Then I flipped the first card. "All right, gentlemen," I said, my voice steady, controlled. "Let's play." Because at the end of the day, life was just one long game. And me? I was still holding all the cards.